Miss Mitkin languidly took her bag out of the desk drawer and began to apply makeup. Burckhardt offered her the envelope. "Drop this in the mail for me, will you? Wait a minute. I wonder if I ought to phone Mr. Barth to make sure. Did his wife say whether he was able to take phone calls?" "Didn't say." Miss Mitkin blotted her lips carefully with a Kleenex. "Wasn't his wife, anyway. It was his daughter who called and left the message." "The kid?" Burckhardt frowned. "I thought she was away at school." "She called. That's all I know." Burckhardt went back to his own office and stared distastefully at the unopened mail on his desk. He didn't like nightmares. They spoiled his whole day. He should have stayed in bed like Barth. A funny thing happened on his way home. There was a disturbance at the corner where he usually caught his bus. Someone was screaming something about a new kind of deep freeze, so he walked an extra block. He saw the bus coming and started to trot, but behind him someone was calling his name. He looked over his shoulder. A small, harried-looking man was hurrying toward him. Burckhardt hesitated and then recognized him. It was a casual acquaintance named Swanson. Burckhardt sourly observed that he had already missed the bus. He said, "Hello." Swanson's face was desperately eager. "Burckhardt?" he asked inquiringly, with an odd intensity, and then he just stood there silently, watching Burckhardt's face with a burning eagerness that dwindled to a faint hope and died to a regret. He was searching for something, waiting for something, Burckhardt thought, but whatever it was he wanted, Burckhardt didn't know how to supply it. Burckhardt coughed and said again, "Hello, Swanson." Swanson didn't even acknowledge the greeting. He merely sighed a very deep sigh. "Nothing doing," he mumbled, apparently to himself. He nodded abstractedly to Burckhardt and turned away. Burckhardt watched the slumped shoulders disappear in the crowd. It was an odd sort of day, he thought, and one he didn't much like. Things weren't going right. Riding home on the next bus, he brooded about it. It wasn't anything terrible or disastrous. It was something out of his experience entirely. You live your life like any man, and you form a network of impressions and reactions. You expect things. When you open your medicine chest, your razor is expected to be on the second shelf. When you lock your front door, you expect to have to give it a slight extra tug to make it latch. It isn't the things that are right and perfect in your life that make it familiar. It's the things that are just a little bit wrong. The sticking latch, the light switch at the head of the stairs that needs an extra push because the spring is old and weak, the rug that unfailingly skids underfoot. It wasn't just that things were wrong with the pattern of Burckhardt's life. It was that the wrong things were wrong. For instance, Barth hadn't come into the office, yet Barth always came in. Burckhardt brooded about it through dinner. He brooded about it despite his wife's attempt to interest him in a game of bridge with the neighbors all through the evening. The neighbors were people he liked, Anne and Farley Dennerman. He had known them all their lives, but they were odd and brooding, too, this night, and he barely listened to Denneman's complaints about not being able to get good phone service, or his wife's comments on the disgusting variety of television commercials they had these days. Burckhardt was well on the way to setting an all-time record for continuous abstraction when, around midnight, with a suddenness that surprised him, he was strangely aware of it happening. He turned over in his bed and quickly and completely fell asleep. Chapter 2. On the morning of June 15th, Burckhardt woke up screaming. It was more real than any dream he had ever had in his life. He could still hear the explosions, feel the blast that crushed him against a wall. It did not seem right that he should be sitting bolt upright in a bed in an undisturbed room. His wife came pattering up the stairs. "Darling," she cried, "what's the matter?" He mumbled, "Nothing. Bad dream." She relaxed, hand on heart. In an angry tone, she started to say, "You gave me such a shock." But a noise from outside interrupted her. There was a wail of sirens and a clang of bells. It was loud and shocking. The Burkhards stared at each other for a heartbeat, then hurried fearfully to the window. There were no rumbling fire engines in the street, only a small panel truck cruising slowly along. Flaring loudspeaker horns crowned its top. From them issued the screaming sound of sirens, growing in intensity, mixed with the rumble of heavy-duty engines and the sound of bells. It was a perfect record of fire engines arriving at a four-alarm blaze. Burckhardt said in amazement, "Mary, that's against the law. Do you know what they're doing? They're playing records of a fire. What are they up to?" "Maybe it's a practical joke," his wife offered. "Joke? Waking up the whole neighborhood at 6 o'clock in the morning?" He shook his head. "The police will be here in 10 minutes," he predicted. "Wait and see." But the police weren't. Not in 10 minutes, or at all. Whoever the pranksters in the car were, they apparently had a police permit for their games. The car took a position in the middle of the block and stood silent for a few minutes. Then there was a crackle from the loudspeaker, and a giant voice chanted, "Feckle freezers, Feckle freezers. Gotta have a Feckle freezer. Feckle, 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 Feckle." It went on and on. Every house on the block had faces staring out of windows by then. The voice was not merely loud, it was nearly deafening. Burckhardt shouted to his wife over the uproar, "What the hell is a Feckle freezer?" "Some kind of freezer, I guess, dear," she shrieked back unhelpfully. Abruptly the noise stopped and the truck stood still. It was still misty morning. The sun's rays came horizontally across the rooftops. It was impossible to believe that a moment ago the silent block had been bellowing the name of a freezer. "A crazy advertising trick," Burckhardt said bitterly. He yawned and turned away from the window. "Might as well get dressed. I guess that's the end of it." The bellow caught him from behind. It was almost like a hard slap on the ears. A harsh, sneering voice, louder than the archangel's trumpet, howled, "Have you got a freezer? It stinks. If it isn't a Feckle freezer, it stinks. If it's a last year's Feckle freezer, it stinks. Only this year's Feckle freezer is any good at all. You know who owns an Ajax freezer? Fairies own Ajax freezers. You know who owns a triple cold freezer? Commies own triple cold freezers. Every freezer but a brand new Feckle freezer stinks." The voice screamed inarticulately with rage. "I'm warning you. Get out and buy a Feckle freezer right away. Hurry up. Hurry for Feckle. Hurry for Feckle. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Feckle, 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 Feckle." It stopped eventually. Burckhardt licked his lips. He started to say to his wife, "Maybe we ought to call the police about," when the speakers erupted again. It caught him off guard. It was intended to catch him off guard. It screamed, "Feckle, Feckle, 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 Feckle. Cheap freezers ruin your food. You'll get sick and throw up. You'll get sick and die. Buy a Feckle. Feckle, 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 Feckle. Ever take a piece of meat out of the freezer you've got and see how rotten and moldy it is? Buy a Feckle. Feckle, Feckle, Feckle. Do you want to eat rotten, stinking food, or do you want to wise up and buy a Feckle? Feckle, 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 Feckle." That did it. With fingers that kept stabbing the wrong holes, Burckhardt finally managed to dial the local police station. He got a busy signal. It was apparent that he was not the only one with the same idea, and while he was shakingly dialing again, the noise outside stopped. He looked out the window. The truck was gone. Burckhardt loosened his tie and ordered another Frosty Flip from the waiter. If only they wouldn't keep the Crystal Cafe so hot. The new paint job, searing reds and blinding yellows, was bad enough, but someone seemed to have the delusion that this was January instead of June. The place was a good 10 degrees warmer than outside. He swallowed the Frosty Flip in 2 gulps. It had a kind of peculiar flavor, he thought, but not bad. It certainly cooled you off, just as the waiter had promised. He reminded himself to pick up a carton of them on the way home. Mary might like them. She was always interested in something new. He stood up awkwardly as the girl came across the restaurant toward him. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen in Tylerton. chin height, honey blonde hair.